A number of years ago, Honda announced a pretty aggressive electrification strategy. That includes vehicles like the Insight, their dedicated compact hybrid sedan, the Clarity in fuel cell, electric, and hybrid version, the Accord hybrid, and now this Honda CR-V hybrid, their first ever crossover hybrid. This is promising to give us 38 miles per gallon, not quite as high as we see in the Toyota RAV4 hybrid, but the sure-footedness of a mechanical all-wheel drive system. This will also compete very directly with the Ford Escape hybrid, the Ford Escape plug-in hybrid, and in some sort of weird ways, perhaps the upcoming Kia Sorento hybrid. The Sorento hybrid is one step larger, so it may also compete with the Honda Pilot. Up front, the hybrid model looks very much like the rest of the CR-V lineup. Really, the main differentiation is this blue halo around the Honda logo and the fact that all hybrid models get LED headlamps. LED headlamps are not standard in the rest of the CR-V line, but we do have them available in the top-end trims. There's a lot of blacked out trim going on here with some subtle chrome accents on either side, and we do have LED fog lamps down below. Honda sensing is standard on all CR-V hybrid models. That gives us aggressive lane keeping assistance, road departure mitigation, autonomous braking, and collision warning on all models. Blind spot monitoring is also available. That's what we have on this particular vehicle, but we don't have available features like a 360-degree camera system that we do find on the new RAV4. At 182.1 inches long, the CR-V is sort of in the middle of the compact crossover segment. This is a little bit longer than its most direct competitor, the RAV4 hybrid. It is a little bit shorter than the upcoming Kia Sorento hybrid, which I suppose you could again consider a direct competitor to this. And in terms of overall interior room, this is pretty similar to the Ford Escape hybrid, its other most direct competitor in the US, and the one that's most similar to this in some ways because it also has a mechanical all-wheel drive system. Moving to the back, we find a pretty vertical hatch that's really noticeable when you open the hatch, that we have an opening that's very, very tall. Some have said that this looks a little bit minivan-like or a little bit jelly bean-like in the rear. That definitely lends to the cargo practicality we find in the CR-V, but it's not quite as aggressive as some of the newer entries. I do like the tail lamp design, however. These have always reminded me of an upside-down question mark. Under this hood, we find essentially an all-wheel drive variant of the hybrid system that we find in the Accord hybrid. In terms of theory of operation, this system is quite different than the Ford and Toyota systems, which operate very similarly to one another. This is a 2-liter 4-cylinder engine. It produces 143 horsepower and 129 pound-feet of torque on its own. And system horsepower comes in at 212 horsepower, but we should talk about that a little bit because this is what is known as a serial and parallel hybrid system. But the serial part is important to understand. Below 45 miles an hour, only the electric motor that is directly connected to the front wheels, just about 180 horsepower in terms of output, can drive the car forward. So below about 45 miles an hour, really 180 horsepower is all you get. Now Honda does dispute that, but they don't dispute that the electric motor output is just about 180 horsepower, and that's all that can drive you forward at those speeds. Honda basically says that the system output, battery plus electric motor, that whole contraption can deliver 212 horsepower total, but they admit that the motor is limited to just about 180 horsepower. That's what's going on there. The key thing to know is that this is not going to be as peppy as the RAV4's hybrid system. Even though that RAV4 hybrid system produces only a few more horsepower on paper, the design of the system means that this isn't going to feel quite as peppy. But fuel economy is pretty close. According to the EPA, they say this will give you 38 miles per gallon combined, 35 in the city, 40 on the highway, and we have a mechanical all-wheel drive system. That's similar to what we see in the Ford Escape hybrid. It also has a mechanical all-wheel drive system, but the RAV4 hybrid has an e-all-wheel drive system with an electric motor in the back. The all-wheel drive system in the CR-V hybrid is essentially the same one that we find in the non-hybrid CR-V. That means that assuming the front wheels had absolutely zero traction, this vehicle could send more power to the rear axle than the RAV4 hybrid. The RAV4 hybrid is limited to 54 horsepower and under 90 pound-feet of torque to the rear axle because there's just an electric motor back there. And that means that in low traction situations like ice or snow or sleet, this is going to feel more sure-footed, more like the regular CR-V. If that's something that you're interested in, that's an excellent reason to put this on your shopping list. Front seat comfort is excellent for a mainstream vehicle. We have a 4-way adjustable lumbar support in this car, which I really love. Not too many mainstream compact crossovers offer 4-seat lumbar support, although the passenger seat does not get it. But on the bright side, the passenger seat is powered, and it's not powered in the RAV4 hybrid. We have a tilt telescopic steering column with a pretty large range of motion, and the steering wheel is pretty comfortable, as is the seat bottom cushion, which has a little bit more thigh support than we find in some of the competition. One of the big selling points for the CR-V is the back seat. We have more combined legroom than we find in most of the other compact crossovers in America. certainly more than we find in the RAV4 hybrid. With this front seat comfortably adjusted for a 6'5" person, I have about 3 inches of legroom left, and headroom is pretty decent as well, although it's worth noting that we don't have an available panoramic moonroof in this model. If you're a family with small children, there are a few things back here you may appreciate. The first thing is that, like some other Honda vehicles, the rear seats appear to be a little bit closer to the floor, and that means that kids are going to be more comfortable because their legs aren't going to be dangling in front. We obviously have more legroom as well, and that's going to mean more room for rear-facing child seats, several inches more versus the RAV4. I can sit comfortably in the front seat and have a rear-facing child seat behind me at 6 feet tall, and I cannot do that in the RAV4 hybrid. The rear seats also fold completely flat with the cargo area in the back, and that means that the distance between the seat back and the ceiling is a little bit larger than we find in the RAV4 also. So even though we don't have as much cargo space in the back, if you wanted to fold the seats down, you may be able to stick a slightly larger item into the CR-V. The downside, of course, is that Honda loves putting seat belts in the ceiling for the center seat position, and this is definitely not my favorite. If you put a child seat in the middle, you're going to have to use one of these shoulder belts, right like that, and that means that your child seat can be skewed to one side, making it less comfortable for another child or an adult to sit next to it. It also means that we have a pretty big bulge right back there in the cargo area, and that's going to cause problems with those larger loads. Because of the battery placement in the CR-V hybrid, cargo capacity drops from class leading at 39.2 cubic feet down to 33.2, so below the RAV4 hybrid. That's because under this load floor, we don't find a spare tire. Instead, we get a tiny well where we can have a can of Fix-A-Flat and the tire inflator kit. And then behind that, of course, the lithium-ion battery pack for the hybrid system. So we don't have anywhere to put a spare tire, and that is a big benefit to the RAV4 hybrid, where you can put a spare not just in the hybrid version, but also in the plug-in hybrid. As we look around the interior, our usual disclaimer applies. Keep in mind that we are in the top-end trim, so there are a few things in here that we won't find in the base models. We do have extending sun visors. That's a nice touch that I really appreciate in here. We have a pretty standard-sized moonroof right there over the driver and front passengers' heads. No panoramic moonroof is available. The driver and front passenger get height-adjustable shoulder belts and height-adjustable headrests. Although the center section of the seat back and bottom cushion features perforated leather, these seats are just heated. They are not ventilated. The bolsters on the seat side and back are not terribly aggressive, so larger folks shouldn't have any problem fitting comfortably up front. The front doors are made from a mix of hard and soft touch plastics, and the design reminds me a little bit of some luxury cars out there with the imitation wood trim going on there on the top of the door. We have a nice, comfortable, soft armrest there, and then harder plastics down on the bottom of the door around that bottle holder. Let me know what you think about the dashboard design in the comment section. I like the look of the CR-V's dashboard. I really like the imitation wood trim as well, to be honest. I think it's relatively well done as far as imitation wood goes. But if we move to the center of the dashboard, we find one of the major downsides to the CR-V, and that is this infotainment system. It is definitely getting on a little bit. It does feature smartphone integration, as you can see right here, but if we get into the native interface, you'll notice that it is not as snappy as the larger screen that we find in the RAV4. Going back and forth between apps takes a bit more time. Loading Apple CarPlay when you first start the vehicle definitely takes some time. And CarPlay and Android Auto have not been terribly reliable in the last few Honda vehicles that we've looked at. I think that's due to software updates on the phone side, but that may have caused some instability with the infotainment systems in the vehicles. Definitely keep that in mind. Below that, we have the controls for the dual-zone automatic climate control system, the push-button shifter arrangement that we find in a number of Honda vehicles. This is not my favorite button arrangement, but I suspect most people will get used to it, and there is a nice side benefit. If I put the vehicle in drive, and I pull up into a parking space, and I have my foot on the brake, and I just press the power button, it will automatically put the car in park. That's kind of a handy feature. We have some buttons for the hybrid system over there, EV mode, sport mode, and econ mode. Below that, we have two USB inputs. The one on the left works with the smartphone integration. The one on the right is just a charging port. We then have a Qi wireless charging mat right there. Two large cup holders here. These are well placed, so there's nothing here that's going to get splashed by soda as it's being spilled unless it can reach up here to the drive button. That is a nice design touch because there's a little bit less opportunity for you to gum up the works if you spill your Coke in here. We have a padded center armrest. It opens to reveal a very large storage area. There's a sliding divider, so you can slide it back there and have two tiers of storage. This one has a little lip to it so that way things don't roll off, and a rubbery liner. And if we lift that out of the way, we have access to a really large and deep storage area. Rather than some of the competition where storage is scattered throughout the interior, a lot of it is very centralized there in the center console. The instrument cluster is almost a full LCD. The only things that aren't contained in that LCD in the middle are the fuel gauge over here on the right and the battery gauge over here on the left. In this display, we find a power and charge gauge across the top rather than a tachometer like we find in other Hondas. Large digital speedometer right there in the middle, maintenance reminders, infotainment information, phone information, trip computer information, all that sort of stuff going on right in there. The 3-spoke steering wheel is the same as the non-hybrid model. We have a large bottom spoke right there and paddles on the back. These paddles control throttle lift-off regen, how much regen you get when you just lift your foot off the accelerator pedal. This is something that I wish every EV and hybrid out there would have. These are absolutely great. You can go from almost no regen to pretty aggressive regen just at the click of a paddle, and it's not adjustable in the competition in this segment. On the left side of the steering wheel, we find buttons for the infotainment system. This is not a touch slider, this is just a volume up-down toggle. We find a button to interact with that multifunction LCD instrument cluster, and then on the right side, we find the controls for the lane keeping assistance system and the radar adaptive cruise control. In our 0 to 60 tests, the CR-V Hybrid is the fastest version of the CR-V available right now. 0 to 60 happened in 7.8 seconds. Now, on the other hand, I was a little bit disappointed by that because the RAV4 Hybrid is faster, and it's notably faster. I had expected this to be an awful lot closer to that RAV4. The main reason for that is the way this hybrid system operates. Again, below 45 miles an hour, it is a serial hybrid system. And in situations that require more torque, the system also has to revert to its serial mode. So for instance, as we're climbing up this hill here, even if I accelerated up to about 43, 44, 45 miles an hour or so, the system does not go into its parallel hybrid mode, so we get more engine noise in the cabin. And you'll notice as you start accelerating, the engine will just hang out at a really high RPM, generating the power that's required for that 180 horsepower electric motor to drive the car forward. Now remember that when you're climbing hills, there is going to be a point where all you're left with is the power that the engine can deliver and the power that can be generated by the generator connected to the engine, which is less than the engine's total output. Then that has to be shuttled over to the 180 horsepower electric motor, and that's why once the battery is depleted, this certainly feels a little bit more sluggish than the parallel hybrid systems that we find in the Ford Escape and of course the Toyota RAV4. On the other hand, stopping distances are better in the CR-V Hybrid. 120 feet in this vehicle versus nearly 130 feet in the RAV4 Hybrid. That's due to the wider tires. We have 235 width tires on this model versus 225 tires on the RAV4, and they weigh about the same. These are going to be the heaviest versions of either vehicle until, of course, the RAV4 Prime comes on the line. That's going to be obviously the heaviest version of the RAV4, but curb weight is pretty comparable between these two vehicles. The Ford Escape Hybrid sort of splits things here. We don't have as much power as we find in the RAV4 Hybrid, but it does share a very common design with the RAV4 Hybrid system, so performance is going to be pretty similar to the options that we're talking about here, the RAV4 and the CR-V, right here in the just around 7.5 to 8 second range. When it comes to handling, I'm going to give the CR-V Hybrid a B. That surprised me a little bit because I had expected this to be a little bit more fun out on the road. There is something a little different about the way this feels versus the regular CR-V. You can definitely feel the added weight. There's more weight going on in the rear, which helps the weight balance, but you can still feel that this is a little bit heavier. Out on a rougher road like the gravel road that we're on here, the CR-V Hybrid delivers a slightly more polished ride than the RAV4 Hybrid. I'd say this is pretty in keeping with the Ford Escape Hybrid. The Honda has a little bit more body roll, a little bit more tip and dive than some of the other options, but thanks to the high ground clearance that we find even in the hybrid model, we get a lot of suspension travel, and that really does help soak up the larger bumps that are out here on a rougher road. Out on a gravel surface like this, you'll also notice the added traction that we get from the mechanical all-wheel drive system. So if I were to slow down and then just accelerate briskly off, we don't get any front wheel scrabble like we do get in the RAV4 Hybrid. That's because this can lock the center coupling and make sure that all four tires are getting equal amounts of power. And in a vehicle with an E all-wheel drive system, that cannot happen. We get much more power on the front axle, a lot less on the rear, so we get that front wheel scrabble, then eventually the rear end will sort of catch up. We see that not just in Toyota's hybrid systems, but also Volvo's plug-in hybrid systems, because they also have an imbalance of power in that way. In our cabin noise testing, we got 71.5 decibels in here, making this the quietest version of the CR-V that we've tested. That is just a hair quieter than the RAV4 Hybrid, but we have to have some caveats here. If you're hill climbing in this, then it's going to be much noisier because the engine is going to have to be revving much higher. It's going to be working harder to get you up that hill just due to the amount of power that we get out of the engine alone. And because of the way the hybrid system is designed, it's going to be spending more time at those higher RPMs to get you up that same hill. And that's part of why the fuel economy when hill climbing is a little bit disappointing, to be honest. But let's dive into that a bit deeper. In our regular fuel economy drive loop, where we have some high-speed highway, some low-speed highway, a lot of city driving, etc., this averaged 38.6 miles per gallon, so right around what the EPA says you should get. On that same loop, the RAV4 hybrid averaged 41.8 miles per gallon. Again, exactly what you'd expect because that is rated for 40 mpg. The reason I think that the RAV4 did a little bit better than the EPA score versus this EPA score is that higher speed highway travel is more efficient in the RAV4. When operating above 45 miles an hour in parallel hybrid mode, there is just one fixed ratio between the engine and the wheels. It's like this car having just 5th gear. Well, at higher speeds, maybe you'd want a 6th gear or a 7th gear or 8th gear, and the planetary power split hybrid system we find in the RAV4 allows you to effectively have those parallel ratios that we do not have over here in this. Now, on my daily commute, I drive up and over a 2,200-foot mountain pass, and on that daily commute, I averaged just 23 miles per gallon. That is a shocking difference. Let's unpack that a little bit more, of course. Going up and over the mountain pass, I start at 1,300 feet because I don't live at sea level on the other side. I do live a little bit up the hill, up and over the hill, down to the city, and then drive on some flat land for about 30 miles overall. That direction, I get 40 mpg, a little bit above the EPA score because of that long downhill travel. However, on the reverse, I got just 18 miles per gallon, giving us an average of 23 mpg on that trip. 23 mpg is actually below what we got in the non-hybrid CRV. And climbing the hill is the reason why. Climbing up that hill, the battery depletes itself, and then the engine is just whirring and whirring and whirring at high speeds in order to give us the power required to continue up the hill at 60 to 65 miles an hour. Bear in mind that I'm driving this just like a normal vehicle, so passing cars where passing is required, keeping up with the rest of traffic the rest of the time. But that's exactly what I'm doing with the RAV4. And even when driving the two vehicles back to back in a caravan style where someone else is driving the RAV4, I'm driving this, then we switch places, but we're driving up the same hills at the same time in the same weather, the RAV4 is going to be more efficient. So it really depends on your driving situation. If you have a pretty average mix of driving, you're not going at high speeds, you're not doing a lot of hill climbing, then this is going to be very, very efficient. And it's going to be almost as efficient as the RAV4 hybrid. If, however, you do a lot of hill climbing, you do a lot of high-speed driving, say you live in Texas where they have 85-mile-an-hour limits, then this is not going to be as efficient. One of the big selling points for the CR-V hybrid is its relatively low sticker price. It starts at $27,850. That's about $1,200 more than a comparably priced base LX all-wheel drive model. It's important to remember that all-wheel drive is standard in the CR-V hybrid. That puts the break-even point versus the non-hybrid model somewhere between 3 and 4 years for most folks out there. It's also worth noting that if you're shopping base trims here, the hybrid model gives you LED headlamps, keyless go, and a cargo cover that you won't find on the base non-hybrid LX. Now, as you work your way on up the trim ladder, then the hybrid becomes a little bit more expensive, interestingly enough. So if we're taking a look at the very top end touring trim, then the delta grows from $1,200 down there at the LX trim up to about $3,000 or so. The touring hybrid model will top out at about $36,050. At that point in time, the break-even is definitely going to stretch out. It's going to be closer to 6 or 7 years for most folks out there. But again, that will really depend on your driving cycle. With that out of the way, let's dive into our first competitor here. Obviously, it has to be the Toyota RAV4 hybrid. The two main advantages for the CR-V hybrid over the RAV4 hybrid are a lower sticker price, so $26,650 versus $28,350 for the base RAV4 hybrid model, and the fact that we have that mechanical all-wheel drive system. Now, the e-all-wheel drive system in the RAV4 hybrid is pretty capable and will suit most folks just fine, but if you are concerned about having that more traditional feel or having a system that's simply more capable in a wider variety of situations, then that is definitely going to be the CR-V hybrid, but you're going to have to give up fuel economy for that. In addition, there's some definite pros and cons going on here. The CR-V hybrid has more legroom, but it has an older infotainment system. It has more comfortable seats, especially in the very top end trim, but we don't have available seat ventilation like we find in the RAV4. I also think the RAV4 looks a little bit newer, a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more stylish than we see in the CR-V. A lot of folks out there have commented that the CR-V looks sort of like a small minivan, and I can definitely see that by the shape. I don't find it objectionable, but I do think the RAV4 is a little bit more attractive. But But the big win for the RAV4 is clearly going to be fuel economy. The second win that's probably going to affect less folks out there is the towing ability. The RAV4 Hybrid is rated for 1,750 pounds of towing ability. The CR-V Hybrid, for some reason, has a tow rating of 0. And then, of course, we have the spare tire that we find in the RAV4. There's enough room in there for either a compact spare tire that the vehicle comes with, or a full-size spare tire if you wanted to swap one out aftermarket, just like I did with our long-term RAV4. Front seat comfort and combined legroom are certainly better on the CR-V, so if you're torn about these two vehicles and you want the more comfortable front seat, or you want room for child seats in the second row, that's going to be a little bit easier to accommodate in the CR-V than in the RAV4. But I suspect if my own money were on the line at this exact moment, I would actually go back on what I said at the launch event of the CR-V Hybrid, and I might get the RAV4 Hybrid instead of the CR-V. We've had more time to spend with the CR-V over this week, and all the folks here at Alex Autos that were driving the vehicle, we all noticed that the fuel economy was lower than the RAV4 Hybrid in similar driving situations. And again, theoretically, that's what these vehicles are supposed to be all about, so the CR-V Hybrid definitely has to take a few points off for that. Making things even tougher is the Ford Escape Hybrid, which uses a hybrid system that thematically mirrors what we see in the RAV4 Hybrid. Now, Ford and Toyota developed their hybrid systems supposedly independently of one another. They ended up having some patent conflicts. They sued one another in court, and the way that worked out is that they decided to share patents for the hybrid systems. But basically, they operate in a very similar way. And that's why Ford's hybrid systems, like Toyota's hybrid systems, tend to deliver good real-world fuel economy. Now, unfortunately, at this time, I haven't had the opportunity to test the Escape Hybrid for a long-term drive. I've only been able to drive it for a few days at a time. But based on our initial drives of the Escape Hybrid, fuel economy seems to be about what the EPA is claiming. There's also a front-wheel drive model if you want one that's more efficient. That will start at $28,265. Pricing is a bit of a problem for the Escape Hybrid. It starts in the SE Sport trim, which is not the absolute base version of the Escape. Now, we do have a few things in that model that you won't find in either the RAV4 Hybrid or the CR-V Hybrid, like a large 12-inch LCD instrument cluster, but you aren't going to find all the same kind of active safety technologies standard on the Escape Hybrid that we do find in the Toyota or the Honda, so definitely keep that in mind. Also keep in mind that you're probably going to get a better deal on the Escape on the Ford lot. That's something that I try not to talk about too much here because those deals are constantly changing. But at this exact moment, there's at least $1,000 of national incentive cash on the Escape Hybrid, so that's going to drop the price tag probably somewhere between the CR-V and RAV4. Fuel economy is excellent on the Escape Hybrid. It gets 41 miles per gallon if we're talking about the front-wheel drive version, 40 miles per gallon if you choose the all-wheel drive version, and like the CR-V Hybrid, it has a mechanical all-wheel drive system. So if you're looking for high fuel economy and a mechanical all-wheel drive system, in all likelihood, the Escape is going to be beating the CR-V Hybrid when it comes to fuel economy. Again, you'll have to wait until we can get our hands on the Escape for a full week so we can run it through our usual battery of tests and, of course, give it an official fuel economy score. But again, based on my initial drives of the Escape Hybrid, it definitely seems to be punching above where the CR-V is. But on the other hand, not all of those active safety technologies are standard. The interior is not quite as accommodating as the CR-V, and I think that the looks have been a little bit polarizing. Part of the reason for that is that Ford has decided to go into sort of two different directions with their small crossovers. The Bronco Sport is going to be the more truck-focused, more off-road focused vehicle, and the Escape is supposed to appeal to someone that wants a more on-road focused vehicle. So it's going after perhaps the Ford Fusion demographic rather than the Bronco demographic, I guess is the best way to describe that. And that's logically why the Escape looks sort of like an inflated Fusion crossbred with an inflated Ford Escape. As far as regular hybrid goes, that's pretty much the extent of the competition for the CR-V. I suppose you could look at something like a plug-in hybrid Mitsubishi Outlander. It starts at $36,295, but there's a lot of cash on the hood, and there's also a federal tax credit of nearly $6,000. That should drop its real-world price tag down to around $28,000. Now, on the downside, although we do get EV range, we also get middling fuel economy when operating as a hybrid, a pretty lackluster interior in terms of quality and design. It definitely seems like it's out of a different era, questionable handling, and also really sluggish acceleration. The Mitsubishi Outlander plug-in hybrid is supposed to be redesigned here very soon with Nissan's help now that Nissan owns Mitsubishi, so hopefully we'll be getting that new one soon. Likely because of the budget situation going on at Mitsubishi, they still have not brought us the mid-cycle updates that we see available in Europe or in Japan in the Outlander, and that's part of why fuel economy seems to be on the low side. Now, we are going to be seeing a few more hybrids coming up soon. We fully expect to see something along the lines of a Hyundai Tucson hybrid, possibly a Kia Sportage hybrid, and we're definitely going to get a Kia Sorento hybrid that's going to be sort of one half size step larger than this. And of course, there's the new Toyota Venza, which is going to be all hybrid all the time. But until those models drop in the US, I think it's really going to be a three-way battle here. If fuel economy is your prime concern, then you should be looking at the Escape or the Toyota RAV4 hybrid. And I think that the overall win for me in this segment, at least at the moment, is going to be the Toyota RAV4 hybrid. A close second to the CR-V hybrid if you want the extra room. But again, you're going to have to give up on fuel economy. And theoretically, that's again what these vehicles are all about. So if you have rearward-facing child seats, or you plan on putting passengers with longer legs in the back of your crossover, put the CR-V on your shopping list. Otherwise, I think that the RAV4 hybrid is a slightly better buy for the moment. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below, and what would you buy if your money were on the line right now? And would you be interested in looking at something like the Toyota Venza, which is going to be new for 2021, and really is best looked at as a more upscale RAV4. We don't get any more interior room. In fact, we get a little bit less interior room than we find in the RAV4, mainly cargo area. The cargo area shrinks about 20% or so, but it has a more upscale interior and definitely a unique looking design on the outside. Let me know down there. Be sure and find us over at facebook.com/AlexNautos, over at Instagram if you want to see the lighter side of things, and I'll see all of you next week.